You would need to know the source of the contaminant, the temperature, and other atmospheric conditions.
And we have to see where the level of concentration will be the highest. And from there, we could plan an effective emergency response.
Through the use of supercomputers, this will allow us to vary our weather conditions. It will also allow us to vary our release points.
With a computational code, we can input certain parameters and allow preset equations to solve for us where the contaminant would disperse throughout the city.
The problem of predicting dispersal of a biological or chemical agent is one of the many difficult scenarios scientists face. This problem demands development of new and advanced models for highly refined weather simulation and computational fluid dynamics. Their complexity pushes the boundaries of computational and atmospheric science. The Army High Performance Computing Research Center and the Army recognized the need for new methods and more powerful computers to address such problems. They brought together university researchers and students to develop advanced computational techniques and simulation models. The work is being done in partnership with scientists at the Army Research Laboratory, who are interested in better methods of weather prediction at finer and finer scales for both battlefield environment prediction and homeland defense.
That's one of the primary reasons why the Army has gotten heavily involved, at least from an atmospheric science point of view, in supercomputing.
John Mercurio is chief of the Battlefield Environment Division at ARL. He visited AHPCRC just after the new Cray X1 computer was installed.
We're going into areas where the terrain is extremely complex. There's a high potential of being in urban areas, which is a completely different meteorological situation than is the open plains or the large-scale battle. So what we're looking at in that case is not necessarily is it going to rain, but are there going to be fogs? How long are the fogs going to occur? Because those are the things that are going to affect the soldier's ability to maneuver, to acquire his target. Those things are a lot less predictable than rain clouds because they're local phenomena versus phenomena that are driven by the larger scales.
Today's battlefield commanders are faced with an entirely different scenario than they've been faced with in the past.
To augment its expertise in weather modeling, the center enlisted its newest member, the University of North Dakota. Bruce Smith is Dean of the School of Aerospace Sciences.
It's no longer just a matter of being able to see through haze or through the kinds of battlefield clutter that you used to see in the past. Now those things are things that can hurt you. And so you need to know exactly where they are and where they're moving so you can deploy and be successful without putting your troops in harm's way.
David Van Gilst was one of the UND students who worked on coupling weather data with the flow simulation.
My project was taking the output of the MM5 weather model and using it to create a set of boundary conditions for the gas dispersion model so that it could be more accurately simulated under a variety of different weather conditions.
Part of the challenge was making the regular grid of a weather model work with the variable elevations of downtown buildings.
In the vertical direction, the coordinates follow the terrain like this, so it has to be converted into a distance off of the ground for the purposes of the unstructured mesh format. Once it was in that format, we were able to use the Presto visualizer to create different images here. This is vectors of wind direction and speed, and then the little blue section is an isosurface of the temperature.
Certainly as the battlefield changes and becomes more technologically oriented, accurate weather information and dispersal information becomes critical to the success of the mission. That type of information needs to be readily available to the commanders as they fight in an environment like that.
If you look at our computer growth in the past 3 decades, it becomes obvious that the need for more speed, more processors, more memory, more storage is never ceasing.
Dr. N. Radhakrishnan is Director of Computational and Informational Sciences at the Army Research Laboratory, whose mission is to provide innovative science and technology for all operations of the Army. They've taken a leadership role in high-performance computing research.
Current-day problems are more difficult to solve because most of them are interdisciplinary in nature. High-performance computing is a tool to make these studies possible.
The dispersal problem is a good example. Many variables have yet to be modeled accurately.
Included in that are the turbulent effects, which create these horseshoe vortices.
At the University of Minnesota, graduate student Brian Mader is working with faculty to develop algorithms that rapidly model these small-scale and short-lived turbulent phenomena.
Sometime when you're walking down the street, you feel kind of a sudden gust of wind. It's these localized bursts, which are not modeled properly in some of the current programs.
If I'm interested in doing an urban dispersion model over a period of, say, 6 hours, what's happening in that small area of a few kilometers or a few square miles is going to be influenced by whether that is going to be propagating in or traveling into that domain.
Tony Mays is a researcher at Network Computing Services, home to the high-performance computing resources of AHPCRC.
The area where my background is in, which is in weather, requires that for a model like that CFD code, which is only at the level of meters, it has to know, at least at the beginning, where are my winds coming from? And in more advanced versions of a model like that, what are my temperature conditions? What are my moisture conditions? The amount of physics and chemistry that have to be represented if you're interested in saying, well, I want to model a dispersion. If you want to do it accurately, you can see where it's going to involve a lot of computational power.
Now that we're going to higher resolutions and looking at the fine detail, which is probably the most important as far as the Army is concerned, the capabilities that are being provided by the newest computers, the X1 computer as an example, are going to enable us to look at things that we've never been able to look at.
The Cray X1 represents the first of a new generation of computer systems that couples excellent sustained performance with a high-bandwidth, low-latency interconnect to global memory. The Cray X1s at the AHPCRC are the first at an unclassified customer site.
If you want to do cutting-edge research, you need to have a tool that's going to be capable of running high-resolution problems, running them fast, and executing them correctly.
The X1 is kind of a melding of parallel processing and vector processing.
Brad Blazing is director of HPC Services.
Some of the HPCRC codes that we've tried out have ported pretty much directly to it and are running today after having the system running here only for about 3 or 4 days.
When you kind of consider what the stakes are for what the Army has to do, I think that most of us would agree we want them to have the best tools.
I believe the system will be very solid hardware-wise. The unsung heroes in designing any of these computers is the mechanical engineers. The amount of work that goes into the spray evaporative cooling and the power distribution and so forth is very impressive.
It's early because we've just gotten this computer and many things yet to be proven on it, but from the design of that machine, it looks like it's a very good tool. And it definitely would be on the short list of what's the best thing to have in your computational arsenal, so to speak.
As new technology comes online, it gives us additional capabilities as we develop new frontiers of modeling and simulation.
The test case for computer modeling of contaminant dispersion was downtown Atlanta. Kofi Boda is Vice President of Research at Clark Atlanta University.
This center has been really productive in focusing on problems and issues that need high-performance computing tools for the Army.
Students worked on the project with faculty from 3 of the 6 AHPCRC universities, Clark Atlanta, Minnesota, and North Dakota, and with scientists at Network Computing Services. The Clark Atlanta students described the process, beginning with Kenneth Boda and the model of Atlanta, developed over months of careful work.
We developed 75,000 points in our model, and from our points we can then be able to create different edges by just playing connect the dots. Here is an outline of our edges. As you can see, we have our edges for the ground, and we also have our edges for the buildings. From our edge model, we can then generate our face model.
Finally, they assigned the proper boundary condition to each of the faces.
And that is our complete model.
Marvin Watts explains how they determine the varying resolution of an unstructured mesh.
These blue points you see on the screen here are actually referred to as refinement points. And we use these points to define how we want to divide up our geometric model into elements. After we've created the surface mesh, we then create our volume mesh. And basically what this code does is fill that area we've just defined with tetrahedral elements. We then have our elements, our nodes, and the model is ready to be used in simulations.
Bruce Sellers uses Presto running on the center's Cray T3E1200 in Minneapolis to visualize the simulation.
And once we go through all the information of loading our mesh and whatnot, we will end up with this. What our simulation does is solves for the unknown parameters at each node in our mesh. We have the XYZ components of velocity, we have pressure, we have temperature, and we also have concentration levels.
This remote visualization tool uses volume rendering to show time steps in various views.
What you see here is a solid representation of the contaminant and how it's moving through the Atlanta area.
Finally, the time steps can be assembled to create animation.
Closer to the source, you're going to have the higher concentrations. Now the red represents the highest concentrations and the blue represents the lowest concentrations.
For this simulation, the computational capability of the Cray X1 was used to predict the mesoscale weather conditions for Atlanta on October 6, 2002. And the Cray T3E was used to predict the dispersion pattern based upon the weather forecast. It represents the combined work of researchers at Clark Atlanta, North Dakota, and Minnesota.
Since 9/11, the situation has significantly changed with respect to the kind of battlefield environment that both the civilian and military personnel are going to be confronted with. For students to really see the outcome of their work and knowing that this could be used in a real life situation, it's been truly exciting.
The collaboration between the University of North Dakota's Atmospheric Science Department and the AHPCRC is critical to our success. We bring the research from mesoscale modeling and 3D modeling of weather to the high-speed computing environment, which is a piece that we need to be successful. And together, that's a tremendous benefit to the Army.
The nation has become aware that we need to look around, take care of ourselves, and be innovative in the way we fight terrorism.
The sophistication that's required in doing high-performance computing generally taxes a scientist to a point where we really need support. So partnering with facilities such as AHPCRC makes the best investment as far as the Army is concerned.
The AHPCRC is a cooperative research activity between the U.S. Army and the University of Minnesota, whose partners include Clark Atlanta, Florida A&M, Howard and Jackson State Universities, and the University of North Dakota. Network Computing Services is the prime contractor for the AHPCRC support infrastructure. The AHPCRC mission is to develop computational techniques that address critical defense technology issues, projectile target interaction, electromagnetics and signature modeling, battlefield environments, and biological and chemical defense, and to prepare for the future by training the next generation of defense computational researchers.